All right. Well, I think we've got a good crew ready and excited for today's content. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I'll just do a quick intro. I'm Jennifer Millett. I'm the Vice President of Event Strategy and Partnerships at ARMA. And we are so grateful to have Sandy and Jen here today to present today's webinar, Managing Records Retention with Auto Classification.
Our agenda today is we're going to talk about managing records with auto classification. So this is I'm going to say, it's a broad topic. It is a broad topic because auto classification can cover a number of use cases. But we're going to go through a bit of an auto classification 101, just in case there's folks on the call who this might be new, and kind of versus true auto classification versus old auto classification maybe. We're going to talk about automating records retention and other fun things we can do with auto classification. This is a good one, tips to future-proof retention policies and automating compliance. And the big one, and which I really like to hear, is the real-world case study. And we're going to go through how business used auto classification and the results that they saw from it for their use case. We're going to go through prioritizing IG, and I know there's a few folks on the call that they have a challenge with this, how to get the rest of the organization on board and understand and realize the importance of getting your data house and repository in order, and then how one would get started with kind of approaching an auto classification project within your organization.
We like to start at the beginning. We don't want anyone who's new at this or who, maybe this is the first webinar you've come to feel left behind. So we're just going to start with a quick primer on what is classification and auto classification, in case for some reason you don't know that. But basically, classification is a task in which you apply tags or labels or fielded data to a piece of content, to a file, to a record, to a chat exchange. We're very loose about we use a lot of words interchangeably: document, record, file. We basically mean a content nugget. So you can use whatever term you like or are comfortable with. But when we're classifying, we're taking that content nugget and giving a bunch of metadata about it. I sometimes call that gene sequencing the file. Tell me everything there is to know. So these are kind of common examples of the type of classification or metadata that we need. So this is creating metadata. Classification has historically been done by hand. It's essentially a form of data entry where someone is entering metadata, data about data, is entering information about the content nugget or the file. So I have used this image before. I love it. I did not invent this, but I absolutely love it. Metadata is your love note to the future because you're setting up for tomorrow's search and retrieval and discovery production and record retention, everything else, by taking on this effort now. So if you're trying to describe metadata to somebody, if you want a copy of this slide, let me know. I'm happy to give it to you. Okay, so I mentioned this, you can classify manually. And for a long time, that is what we did if we bothered to classify. The problem of that is it's a lot like trying to cut a lawn with scissors. As soon as you get a few feet down, you've got to go back to the beginning and start cutting again. This is not the best use of everybody's time. And the volume at which content is being created or acquired or generated is far outpacing our manual ability to keep up with it. So manual classification is becoming every day more and more, impossible, basically. So that gives us the rise of auto classification, which just again, so we're on the same page, we're talking about software that is performing the analysis, that is reading, in computer science we would call that parsing the file, parsing the content, and coming up with those tags and those classifications and different rules handling. So that also, it's important that we talk about what is true auto classification. That's what I just described, where software is literally reading, parsing the content. If you are using a system that says, gives you a little data input screen, says, hey, user, could you enter whether or not this is a record and whether or not it's under legal hold and whatever else? That's really not true auto classification. That's just an automated order form or a data entry form. So be careful, because a lot of organizations will call that auto classification because you can do things like, yeah, do whatever I did last time. That's not really auto classification. The top definition here is what we're talking about. So the kind of, if you're doing the work, meaning you, a person, or your colleagues are doing the work, it isn't auto. Okay, so before any one of you raise your hand and go, yeah, but what about purview? We're just going to jump right in and talk about it. So if you're not familiar with purview is a set of functionality that you get if you're buying Microsoft M365 and you have the E5 license. Purview is kind of a collection of features and capabilities that comes with that licensing. If you don't know E5, that's the expensive license, okay? It has some ability to set up tagging. Again, it's not really auto classification. It's kind of, you have to set things up and then it'll kind of follow suit, propagate. It's on the way to auto classification, but not really. And there are a lot of drawbacks. And we hear this every time we go to an ARMA conference or a MER, now InfoNext conference. People getting very, very upset with this because the world does not only exist in Microsoft environments. That's one of the biggest drawbacks to Purview. As well as, and this is, I don't understand architecturally why Microsoft persists with this, but their tags cannot be changed. You get one value, and once you put that in, that's it. You cannot change it ever. And that is really a dangerous path to go down, because our context as information governance professionals is always changing. Just look at what's going on with data privacy regulation. Every week something new is coming out. You're making new records classes. There's new content. There's new custodians. Things are constantly in flux, and they need to be changed in a methodical, auditable manner. It can't be one and done, and then that's it for all time. So there are a lot of drawbacks to Purview. Purview, in my personal professional opinion, appears to be oriented at organizations that are either smaller, have very simplistic records keeping or very small data volumes, or very small budgets. Are there organizations like that out there? Yes, of course. But generally, if we're talking about auto classification, records retention, particularly in the context of the other 15 items that would constitute information governance, we are talking about a much more complex, bigger game, and Purview isn't really going to cut it. So I'll stop there, Jen, just in case there are any questions so far.
No questions yet. Yeah.
Great, booking on ahead. So I mentioned true auto classification. Obviously, we didn't say that I'm the president and CEO of Valora. I'm one of the original founders. Yes, Valora does true auto classification. I'm going to show you what we mean by that. So you can kind of think of what the technology is doing as 3 basic steps. It's going through and doing that data, that gene sequencing, and saying, give me all the attributes. It's parsing the content. Okay. Then it's going to start to do little matching algorithms and go, oh, I see a phrase like quarterly balance or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, also known as EBITDA, right? You're only going to see that on you're going to see that on a P&L or an income statement. You're not going to see that on, a termination letter, okay? So you start to be able to kind of hone in on the document type. And that is one of the most important kind of cornerstones of setting up your auto classification effort. So if you're going to spend some time thinking about this area, I highly recommend you start thinking about the types of documents that you have in your organization. Now, I'm not talking about record class exactly. Document type is a feeder and a precursor to record class, but document type stands on its own. Something is, a quarterly balance sheet, whether or not it's a record. So they are distinct concepts, and you want to be able to automatically recognize document types. Most organizations will have about 80 different document types, just to give you a feel for what to expect. And then finally, the true auto classification then takes all that kind of attribute information and then starts to come up with actioning, different forms of disposition that say things like, okay, this is highly sensitive. This may need to be locked down or redacted or moved offline or something like that. Or this is for sure a record and it's past retention. Or this is for sure a record and needs to be moved into a preservation type a repository. Okay, so that's, or this is junk, this is rot, redundant, obsolete, trivial. This needs to be gotten rid of. This is the 78th duplicate. Okay, that's what we mean by disposition algorithms, and they are based on the nature of what has been captured during the previous processes. So let me show you a little how that works. So this bottom corner here in the gray, this is the type of metadata you get just from a file being a file in a file share on a system. It's helpful, but not that helpful. It doesn't tell you what it is. It doesn't tell you whether it's a record. It doesn't tell you how sensitive. It doesn't tell you if there's data privacy in there. It doesn't really tell you anything about the nature of the document. That is where the auto-classification comes in. It's going to start providing this type of information, and these are just examples. And if you look in the green box, these are just examples of date only. Okay, so again, most organizations are going to need about 60, 70 different fields of metadata. That doesn't mean you have to define that. I'm just letting you know what a typical one looks like. And as long as you can grab this information, why wouldn't you? The idea being you can solve like out of a plethora of needs. As long as you're going through the document, get as much as you can, because then you've solved, remember that metadata love note to the future? You've solved all those future use cases where you're going to need to query this content. A good one, for example, now kind of coming on the scene, data minimization. You're going to have to minimize why you have something. And in order to do that, you have to know what it is. So this is what the kind of classification step gives you. Here are examples. How do you determine document type? You look at each data element called a facet, data facet. It's a this, it's a this, it's a this. That leads us to this type of document, document type. And then we have essentially kind of a hierarchical rules engine that says, if XYZ conditions are met, then execute accordingly. So here is an example, a retention example. So if the document type is a contract, and therefore, and it comes from source whatever, and it's this age and what have you, then go ahead and, classify it as this record class, and therefore retain it for such and such duration and under such and such conditions. Okay, and you can see the little italics here. That's that gene sequencing. Those are the enriched metadata that the auto classification is either pulling out or creating. Okay, and those become the little levers that the disposition rules use. So once you kind of understand how that works, the rest kind of lays itself out. Yes, retention is a great use case for this, but there are plenty of others that kind of come along for the ride, whether they're explicitly related to retention like legal hold, or whether they're just kind of ancillary but handy like sensitivity. Okay, so that is kind of in a nutshell what's happening. This is what it looks and feels like. Right now, if you're looking at that giant file share full of stuff that nobody knows what it is, and you come across a file that says this, not very helpful, it's a PDF, it could be anything. Is this useful? Is it important? Is it a record? Is it sensitive? Is it past retention? Who knows? So what auto classification does is go from a line item like this, goes into the document and says, okay, here's what you got. All this orange on the page, that is that gene sequencing, enriched metadata, fielding, tagging, going through and going, it's a this, it's a this, it's a this, and coming up with those 50, 60 fields of metadata, storing that away so that you can then start to do actioning and to do more complex tagging and dispositioning. So, okay, it's a contract and it comes from, this source, or it has this party mentioned in it, or it has these terms and phrases in it. that makes it, an AP record class, and it's record class 1, 2, 3, 4 because of the best match. And so therefore, we know the retention, we know how it has to be handled. Maybe we are tracking sensitivity because that's important, or where we might want to put it. One of the nice kind of side benefits that you get from auto classification is you can have either an explicit or an implicit taxonomy. A taxonomy is like a structure of how you want to organize your content. And you can have the auto classification create what we call a recommended file location, which is where in the taxonomy does this document belong. And you can also think of that as, from a sensitivity standpoint, where in the organization should this document be kept until such time as its life cycle has ended. So there's a lot of fancy things you can start to do once you have this information literally at your fingertips. Ultimately, we're always asking the question, particularly for retention purposes, retain or delete, retain or delete. And that is in many ways sort of almost a daily decision, right? Has it hit its retention period yet? Is it still under legal hold? Did we get a right to be forgotten request from the person who's mentioned in it? There are lots of different reasons and different kind of time clock triggers that will determine retain or delete. All right, so here, let me just back up. We were here. We had this, thanks a lot. We took a little step through here to get lots and lots of info and then get that presented up into what we call a single pane of glass. So this is a dashboard view. You've seen other dashboards, but it's specifically oriented around auto classification. So all those rich metadata fields are now represented here as a chart, as a search parameter. So if you're familiar with parameterized search, that's fancy speak for I want to search within the metadata field categories. So date range, custodian, topics, sensitivity, author. Right? I could construct a pretty slick search that hones in on exactly what it is I'm after for some reason or other than just a blanket, well, I'll search on the word quarantine and see what comes up. You can be a lot more specific about that, and that helps you satisfy things like, show me everything that's past retention that came from marketing and is not under legal hold. That is 3 clicks in something like this, and that is just a huge time savings to be able to do that. And then it's a button to generate a report and send it off to your marketing person and say, hey, you good with this? Can we delete this? Right? That is what the UI with that single pane of glass and that ability to search and drill down and report and action, that's what that gives you.
Sandy, what kind of, how many repositories here can we connect to? What are we looking at when we look at the sources?
That really is a function of the client. How many do you have? There's not any kind of specific limit. You can only do 3 repositories or something like that. For example, we have one group that we've talked to that has 350 file shares all over North America. So in that case, is that 1 or 350? They're all file shares, but there are 350 unique ones. So, but it's a good question in the sense of start to think about, that's why I call it a data source. It doesn't have to be a repository. It doesn't have to be a file share. Other sources would be things like cloud applications like Box, or sometimes like, Salesforce or HubSpot, some sort of application where you might be putting content in as a document, like an upload, or content might be in because somebody has typed in notes about a customer or a deal. That kind of free-form text, like you might see a customer service rep have, that is a content nugget. And so, so your sources is kind of unlimited. It's certainly unlimited in number, and it's relatively unlimited in terms of type. As long as there is some way to get at the content in these systems, file shares are very easy. If you're looking for where to start with file shares. These you essentially just crawl, that's just a permission and a crawl the file share. Other more sophisticated systems, you might use an API, you might use a database query. There's different ways that kind of peek into the data source. At this point at Valora, we've seen them all, so, come challenge me, but the actual number is just a function of, frankly, budget and time, and really more importantly, priority. What do you want to clean up first? We've definitely seen some clients that are like, XYZ repository that nobody's touched in 20 years. We're just going to wait for it to age out, even though we don't really know what's in there. We're just going to age it out and, take it offline. That's the decision for the client. That's not for us, but there isn't any technical, practical limit to the number of repositories.
Awesome. What about document types? And we kind of covered this when we were kind of pulling from guidance data, but are document types mapped to a retention schedule?
In our world, yes, they are. And so you can get into some fun nuances with that, which I'll talk about in a second. So there's no practical number that says you can't have more than 50 doc types. I mean, you have whatever your organization requires. And also something to know is you can have kind of hierarchical document types. From the example from a moment ago, on the one hand, it's a contract. That's a document type, contract. However, you could have a supplier contract, an employee contract. Those are different, and that would be sort of a secondary layer. And then you could have a tertiary, preferred supplier contract, woman-owned business, supplier. Though you can kind of have whatever hierarchy or taxonomy that you need that fits your business. So there isn't a number of document types. It's more what makes sense for the company, what makes sense for everybody's kind of brain space. And then now the other question, how does it map to the records retention schedule? So the ideal scenario, and I'm going to put this out to all of you because we have 86% records managers, try not to have one document type in multiple record classes, because that is hard for auto classification. I'll give you the example of a resume, right? Let's say company A has resumes always belong to HR record class 5, making that up. And company B divides them up by department. There's finance resumes and engineering resumes and manufacturing resumes. That's harder for auto classification because it's going to go resume. Now it has to think about, well, how do I subdefine that? Might it be by, some of the skills that the person has? What if you're an executive in manufacturing? Where do you go? Which one do you go to? And so you might, and that's when we start to use tips and tricks like, well, maybe it depends what repository it came from, or maybe it depends what the path was. And you can do that, but far better to say resumes always get treated thusly. You have all the other tags at your disposal, so you don't have to answer everything in the record class. You can also always just, kind of blanket search. So, I hear this sometimes from records managers, particularly those who've been in the business for a while, because you're used to having only one data field, which was the file name, right? So you would get these file names that are like, resume 2017, record class blah, submitted blah, right? Like the file name is like this long because you just shove all those data elements into the file name. You don't have to do that anymore. You have unlimited facets. Use them. Okay? It's sort of like that. I feel like you don't have to wear all your clothes at once to prove to the world that you have, a nice wardrobe. You can pick the ones that make sense for what you're doing. It's raining out, put the raincoat on. You don't have to wear your bikini that day. So there's kind of an element of that we sometimes have to help people unlearn a little bit and open up into the concept of multifaceting.
Because we're kind of paused here, this is a nice little screen to look at. We do have a few questions.
Sure.
I think this might be a good time to do it, but you tell me if you'd like to kind of save this one. How does Valora identify duplicates? And can Valora assist with removing duplicates, or would it have to be a manual removal?
Oh, sure. I'll dive right into that. I don't have that in this particular presentation, but go to Valora's website. We cover this one all day long. I'll give you the 2-minute overview here. So yes, of course we identify duplicates. It's just a natural byproduct of analyzing the content. And there are 3 levels of duplicates that we identify. The first is what we would call an identical duplicate or a forensic duplicate. They are literally forensic match clones. And that is determined with a hash value. In other words, like a digital fingerprint. Either they match utterly, top to bottom, every single byte of the file, then they're an identical duplicate. Okay, that's the highest form of duplicate, a clone. Then you have the one right under that is what we would call a functional duplicate, where they match in every other dimension except the hash. So the fingerprint doesn't match, but 85 fields of metadata tagging, the text, etc. So when does that happen? The classic example of a functional duplicate is you have a Word file and then you save it as a PDF. They will not hash match. There'll be different file sizes, but they are otherwise, basically identical. So that is what we call a functional duplicate. Those get identified. And then we have what's called a near duplicate, which are documents that are similar. And you can set the bar as to how similar. 60% similar, 80%, 99.2% that are essentially, you can have things like versions. You can have things, my favorite example of a near dupe is a form letter. We send a form letter out to all 85,000 customers. The form letter itself is the same, but the recipient and their address at the very top of the letter is different. That's a classic example of near dupes. Why do you want to group things like this? Because it makes it easy to kind of bulk or batch manage them. Identical dupes, in theory, you can get rid of everyone except one and have that, the team captain. Functional dupes, you might want to, always save the PDF or just save them both or just store them together or bring them together because they're across 14 repositories. Same with near dupes. If one is considered past retention, are the rest of them also same date, same form letter, different addressee? Okay, so the first question, what do we do? That's what we do. It's automatic. It kind of comes with the software. And then can they be actioned automatically? Of course. So, what? It's auto, right? Of course. And, everything from, it's completely, as soon as you encounter, search and destroy, automatic, completely. Most clients don't usually opt for that because we're still a little uncomfortable trusting the software to do things. So what we typically see and what we recommend as a best practice is label first, pull the trigger second. So label everything as should be deleted. This is rot. This is duplicative. This is past retention, whatever, ever. And then you can decide either one-off or bulk or entirely, okay, go. So you can divide up, when and how much the automation takes action for you, including, no, thank you, I'll delete it myself. Thanks for letting me know. So you have everything from the gamut from completely automated to just sort of, I'll call it advisory available.
Yeah. 2 more questions before we go, because these are quickies. Is your tool installed on-prem or cloud-based?
Our tool specifically can be set up in any of those arrangements. We kind of call it our house or your house. And either house can be your house can be on-prem. It can be inside your cloud tenant of choice. You love Azure, you love AWS, whatever. Or it can be in Valoris Cloud. We have our own cloud that we maintain for clients. So that really becomes, there's different trade-offs of one versus the other, different cost bases, different kind of security profiles. So that is really a good discussion to kind of have with both your IT group and whoever's in charge of your kind of like security posture, because depending on the nature of your content and where it lives, is all your content on-prem? Then you're probably better off setting up on-prem. Are you in the process of moving everything to the cloud and you hope to be done by next year? Good luck. Then put it in the cloud. Or do you, we also support hybrid. Half the data's here, half the data's there. Fine, split the solution. It's, it's pretty easy today to kind of accommodate any of these flavors.
One last question before we move on is about connectors. So are connectors needed to perform the auto classification against various structured and unstructured repositories?
Okay, that's a great question. Whoever asked that. By and large, yes, but not universally. So things that don't particularly require, I'll say, much of a connector, or the connector is very simple, would be something like a file share. That's basically just a crawl with permissions. Other things that require you, to go through their specific API, or in some cases, and I'm looking at you, iManage, you have to literally license their API in order to walk through, that is the crawler, to walk through the door of iManage. So it's kind of dependent on the actual source place where the content lives, whether or not you need a connector. Some, like Microsoft is actually quite good about this. They have a bunch of published APIs called the Graph APIs. And once you kind of mastered those, they're relatively easy and you can apply them. So if you're in OneDrive and now you're going to go to SharePoint, it's a small little detail change. Other things are really not, particularly older things. Anybody out there has Enterprise Vault, notoriously difficult to work with a connector. So you definitely want to kind of have that conversation with your vendor or with Valora. We will let you know who's easy, who's hard, when a connector is required, when it's not. One way, if you don't want to go down the connector path, a really clever trick, in particular, if you're sunsetting a system, is just yank the stuff out and then have the stuff in just essentially, kind of like a blob structure, container structure, and, analyze it that way, and don't bother building a connector for a system you're going to be sunsetting or moving away from. So if you're ever in the position essentially of migrating content, there's a beautiful window in there to kind of avoid connectors, get everything clean and curated and gorgeous, and then send it on its way.
Awesome. That was it for our questions. And now just time check. We've got about 20 minutes left. If you can even believe it. So we're gonna
book through.
Do the rest of this.
All right. So I'm gonna kind of skip over this because A, we've kind of talked about it. B, you can read it yourself. It's all over our website. How does it work? Okay, fine. The 6 big IG cases. Obviously, today we're talking about records management, but these are the others. And I only mention it because if you're looking to, this is kind of the end game of this presentation today, if you're looking to build consensus or build solidarity and get, kind of help on your budget, here's where to find it from. These are your friends, okay? All right, so I'm going to skip over this. We did this one. I'm just going to go really quickly. How do we identify rot? You can tell this is rot just by looking at it. So can we. Or so can the software. There's 42 indicators of rot on something like this. And so, of course, yes, this is rot. This should have been deleted in 2014. Why is it still sitting around? Okay, another one. This is a little more sophisticated. So same idea, gonna pull out all that delicious metadata. And by the way, I'll point out, look real carefully here on employee ID. Okay, this is not present on this document anywhere. So how did the auto classification software know this? Because on the back end, back to the connectors, if it is connected to an HR system or it receives some kind of regular report, what we call guidance data, it knows it knows it's an employee termination letter. It knows there's an employee name here. It knows that this is it. And it goes and hunts this down in the HRM and says, oh, here's the employee ID, and puts it into the analysis in case this is somehow relevant. Let's say it's a litigation matter or a right to be forgotten matter. It's important to know this in association with the person's name and this document. So there's some slickness in here, and I just wanted to point it out to you because I know all you eagle eyes will be like, hey, that's not on the document. And you're right, it's not. This is some sophisticated auto classification going on here. Again, we get through, okay, go through, give me all the, the kind of disposition handling, and, go about your day. So we're good on that. I'm going to skip over this. You guys know what these tags, just so you know, every one of these can be handled by auto classification. We expect to handle these tags and many more. And by the way, if you use a tag in your retention, your classification, your records management that you don't see on here, please put that into the chat. We would love to know what else you are looking at that might not be on here. I can tell sensitivity is not here, but we do that too. But just in case there are other ways of doing it, we're students too. We always want to know. So, okay, we kind of talked about this. Let me just briefly, some of the kind of dashboard features that you get. Some are things that like, what is the handling? Again, that's that rules-based talking. You know, when do things expire and how much are past retention? Take me into each year. When can I expect to get rid of things? And then, of course, the detail. Show me exactly what you've got, file by file by file. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Yeah, this is why it's great. Okay, this is an important one. And I want to, everywhere I go, sometimes I feel like I'm like Johnny Appleseed going around the country to get people to talk about retention as a spectrum. And so this is what I mean. On the left, you have stuff that you really should be removing basically on site. As soon as it's generated, you should be getting rid of it. Then you have this, on the left. And then the stuff on the right, you have the stuff that you're never getting rid of no matter what. And then there's the mushy part, the stuff in the middle. Okay, it's active, but it's junk. It's active, but it's rough. Should we get rid of it? Should we not? Now we have to remove on demand. Someone says, forget about me, please. Or there's a data minimization window we hit. Time to get rid of it. And so I'm trying to kind of get the world to view retention as a spectrum. And then everybody always says, where should we start? Where should we start? Here's where to start. Start with your orphan data. Why? Because nobody's going to give you grief about getting it under control because nobody owns it. And therefore, nobody ever has to own it. You can take control, organize it, get that junk out of there, get whatever records remain, and move on with your life. And then use that as an exemplar, as a test bed to show people for the content they're way more protective of, show them what it looks like, how it works, and what you get. There's a little bit of a recommendation there. Okay. This is the goal that you're trying to get to, what we call data under management. In other words, as content is born or acquired or generated, it immediately gets tagged, it has its disposition set, it's refreshed whenever it needs to be refreshed, and everything is perpetually under management and, of course, in compliance. That is the goal. You might be starting a little behind the gate. You have a big pile you have to get through first, but once you get through that pile, this is your future state, ideally forever. Okay, who's leading the way? Good for you in these organizations. You guys are the ones leading the way. Oops, what did I do there? Not what I meant. Okay. All right, let's dive into the case study for the last kind of 15 minutes. So let's talk about Oracle. Nice, gigantic organization. These are their new headquarters in Austin, Texas. I have not been there, but it looks gorgeous. To give you a feel, how big is Oracle? Big. And they got there by purchasing other companies. And they are very big acquirers. They add 5 to 10 per year. And as some of you who are in that kind of growth organization know, acquiring companies means acquiring their content. It doesn't always mean acquiring their staff. And so you have a lot of content that nobody really knows about, and then you have to merge that into your own world in terms of records retention and management. It's a difficult problem. And in the case of Oracle, it was specifically difficult around the most sensitive material they had, which was HR documents, right? What they were really, it's technology, they're really acquiring the people and the software. So they had over 140 different acquisitions that needed to be kind of brought into the fold, some of them dating all the way back since 1994. And partway through our straightening out the world with them, they went and acquired Cerner, one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world, thus complicating it. But not to worry, all is good. So this is kind of what the challenge was and what they were struggling with. And what's really fun about it being Oracle is that they didn't have a solution themselves, even though they are a B2B enterprise level software provider. This wasn't an area that they had tackled. And what's kind of fun about Valora is we had to technically prove that we had capabilities that they did not have internally. It was, I kind of feel kind of like a PhD dissertation and defense. So we had to do that. We have to do that every year, by the way. So this is what we were trying to do at the time we started. 600 gigabytes. It's way into the dozens of terabytes at this time. And what was really kind of happening was they had no kind of mechanism or proof to say this can be deleted or this employee is no longer with the organization, even though they were acquired in 2012, something like that. So it was really just kind of organizing this to the earlier question about 140 unique kind of file shares, if you will, of information. The latter ones, in particular, Cerner, had well beyond your file sharing. We're into Workday and we're into PeopleSoft and so on and so forth for analyzing both structured and unstructured data related to employees. So this is what really the task was, and to some degree still is. How we got off the ground, and this is what we would recommend for anybody, is to start with a phase 1. In other words, a small little pilot project. We sometimes call that core sampling. We're going to core sample down through your file share, kind of see what you've got going there, and come to a quick, easy win. Remember that orphan data I talked about? Those make a great pilot. Kind of do a live working system everyone can see and go, yes, yes, yes. Then we get into sort of what we call a bridge mode, where we're scaling up from a little pilot system into a full bore, kind of enterprise class system. That's where the connectors are coming online and, more processing power. Oops, sorry, bumped it. And then, of course, into the go forward state. Once everything is analyzed once, then we're watching, with the passage of time, right? Some things are going to age out of their retention with the arrival of new data, with different types of regulations coming on board during the duration of this analysis. So there's that kind of always, right, staying in compliance, staying current. That's what we call delta monitoring. We're monitoring whatever's changed, either in the content itself or in the context in which we're operating. And then this was generally what we could see at the outset of our work with Oracle, now in year 4. And we, surprise, surprise, we encountered phase 4, which is, this was such a hit and so great for the organization around their M&A and their HR practice that they have extended it out worldwide to all of HR. And this is the pattern that we like to see. You start with a really killer use case, and it just grows and grows and grows, because once you have that single pane of glass, that UI, some colleague at some point is going to go, what are you doing there? Can I get in there? Can I retrieve data this way? And it kind of, like a good recipe, it just kind of fans out to everybody and everyone wants to jump on board. And that is precisely what has happened at Oracle. There is also today a phase 5 and a 6, but I can't talk about those. Suffice to say, follow the dots. You can probably figure that out. Okay, and just to put some numbers on it, these are their words, not mine. This is a slide that they produced internally to reflect their happiness, their success in working with this type of technology. Yes, in working with Delora, but in implementing, going from a manual process to an automated one. So I'll just let you guys kind of read that. And this might be a good time, Jen. I don't know if there are additional questions that have cropped up.
There were some good ones for the end, though.
Okay, all right, then I'll blow through quickly because we don't have much time. This part, I know that on this call, records managers and folks like that out there, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know that. What we need to do is get the rest of your organization on board. So I encourage you to kind of look at these slides after the fact and recognize that you do not exist in isolation. Everybody wants their hands on the content and would like someone else to curate them, please. That's you. You can become a complete hero to your organization by getting this under control and recognizing that none of these is in isolation. And quite frankly, we call this shared content, shared goals, okay? This is everyone's responsibility. And if you can get everyone on board with that and they all get a piece of the action, then they should all share in the budget. And that's how you get this project across the finish line. Okay, we kind of talked about this, so I'm going to skip this. And I'm going to give you your checklist because everybody's like, can you give me a checklist? Here you go. 10 easy steps to stand up auto classification in your organization.
And this was the question that was just asked. What would Laura need a client to have in place for their auto classification tool to be effective? Would it be a records retention policy? Would it be a PII handling policy?
Yes. So there's number 2. Well done, question person.
That was Gary. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. So yeah, this is what you need to get together. Understand the legal basis for what you're doing, not just this is a good idea. If you have that legal basis, now you have a weapon for all those people going, why do you do this? You go, this is why. Because GDPR says we have to, or whatever. Yes, get those policies together. Another thing, and I think it says under what you will do, is you're going to, one way or another, you're going to have to kind of come up with some exemplar, either documents or a taxonomy or something that says, this is what we hope the future state will look like. Yes, we can talk through that with you, and we have some vanilla ones we would recommend, but the more you know about what you think the perfect world would look like, the faster that conversation is going to go. So if you are prepping, start thinking about what would you like that single pane of glass to report to you. I've given you a bunch of examples in here, but you may need some, you may need the drug name or the employee ID or, whatever it is. So this is what you will need. This is what you will need to do. My checklist for you. Okay. And again, just a little bit of a note. Do not think this is a silver bullet. We install it and 1 week later we're done. I wish, but it's not. This is a long and involved effort. It took you 20 years to get to this point. It's going to take you, honestly, a year or more to get it under control. If you're a large organization with 25 different data silos, you are going to have to spend some time. You're going to need a real budget. But again, the future state of what you're going to be able to be and have should be more than well worth it. And again, if you need help proving that ROI, contact us. We're not here, but we have this great little ROI calculator that will help you make that case, 15 times over. All right, we kind of talked about this. And I'm just there. We'll go right to the Q&A. What else you got, Jen?
Dude, that was it. We answered all those. We answered all the questions in 2 minutes.
Excellent. Well, we'll open it up now to any of your questions or comments. Feel free to jump in, try and stump us.
Yeah, let's give that, because we've got a few minutes left. We've got about 4 minutes left. Let's talk about, it was kind of like the back end of the last question. Like, do businesses need to, have a fully baked records retention policy? Can we help them with things like that, or best practices, and then also a PII handling policy? So what don't I know that I should know, and what to look for in my data?
Yeah. So let me put this out there. You don't need to have everything on day one. First of all, we show up with like kind of a vanilla version of things. And second of all, recognize that the processing is ongoing. It's iterative. You're going to be going back again through your data. So even if you only have part of a plan, or you're kind of experienced, you're kind of figuring out what your plan should be, this is where doc types can be really helpful to you, because don't make a plan without knowing what you have, right? There's a little bit of a chicken and egg here. So you kind of want to run once and say, oh, we seem to have stuff like this, so we should probably have a record class for that. You can use the auto classification to help inform what the end state should be. You don't have to have it all on day one. And again, if you do have it, great, but I guarantee you it'll change even during the course of the analysis. So do not panic if you don't kind of have some of this stuff ready. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. And Matt just asked a good question, which is kind of a onto that, was that, if you don't have a retention schedule, do you see your tool as a way to perform that initial content discovery, right? So that's, yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
also get, side bonus, you also get a data map for free.
Yeah.
Because it's going to tell you where it came from. So that's just, don't pay a lot of money to go get a data map done.
Yeah, yeah. We've got just got a few more minutes. So does Valora actually execute the disposition of the record that it auto-classifies?
It can, yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, again, that's that how automated do you want to be discussion. It can fully do it. Again, in the very beginning, we kind of recommend you oversee and make sure and, authorize and whatnot. But once you're happy that it's operating the way you want, yeah, hands off if that's the way you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Another question, if Valora was brought in to assist a client, do you assess them first to understand if they're ready for Valora services and let them know where the gaps are?
Yeah. That kind of comes with the territory, because if a client really is not ready, this isn't going to make them ready. This is going to cause more confusion. So, we're not generally consultants in this field, but we act like it sometimes. And we'll be honest too, if we think a customer isn't ready, we will tell them that and say, look, you have to get this together, this together, this together. Or more likely, you have to get this kind of executive support, this kind of IT support, and this kind of budget together. So, we're sort of low cost, as in no cost, consultants for you there. We would encourage you to contact us. We want everybody to be successful with these types of technologies. And if you're not ready, we'll be honest with you, you're not ready, but we can certainly help you get there. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we're up at 3:00. That was the full hour. I don't know, Jennifer, you want to come back on, but I just thank you from Sandy and I for attending this afternoon, and we'll certainly send out a recording of this and the slides as well, so people can reference back to them.
Yes, thank you guys so much for attending today. Thank you, Sandy and Jen, for bringing this great content to us. And we will follow up in the next 24 to 48 hours with an email that will contain a link to the presentation as well as today's recording. So again, we thank you so much for being a part of our presentation today. Keep an eye on your inbox for future events coming your way. And until next time, I hope you're safe, happy, and healthy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.